I never thought my life would fall apart in a single afternoon. I was sitting in my car outside our old house when I saw her. My wife, Tasha, was waving goodbye to a man half her age. The look on her face was cold and determined. I could hardly breathe. In that split second, my heart hammered against my chest, and I knew everything was over. I had heard whispers before, but I never believed it would come to this, my wife, after winning $10 million, leaving me for someone new. The stakes were high. Not only was my pride shattered, but the future I'd built was crumbling in an instant. I pulled out my phone, trembling, and tried to dial her name, but it went straight to voicemail. The wind outside howled as if it shared my sorrow and anger. I remembered the day we signed the prenup, a document that protected us both. It was clear, property and money before marriage were separate, but anything earned together during our union was marital. And if one cheated, the other got everything. I thought it would be my shield, a way to bring justice if betrayal ever came knocking. Now, it was the only thing that might save me from complete ruin. But I knew this was just the beginning. I had to fight, to claim what was mine, not just money, but my dignity. Even as I sat there in the cold, dark parking lot, a fire of determination sparked inside me. I would not let her run free with my future. My thoughts raced. How could Tasha do this? Was the money worth throwing away our life? And who was this younger man that she trusted more than me? This was more than a betrayal. It was a challenge. The rules were clear, and karma was ready to serve its cold justice. In that chilling moment, my resolve hardened. I knew what I had to do. The prenup was my trump card. I would find the proof, take every step, and make sure she paid for her deceit. As I started the car and drove away, I promised myself that this was only the start of a long, hard battle. And I would not stop until I had won back my life. I still remember the day Tasha and I got married. The church was packed, the air filled with hope and celebration. Back then, love was simple and pure, until the money came into play. Tasha had always dreamed of a better life, and when she hit the lottery and won $10 million, everything changed. Our once happy home turned into a battleground of whispered secrets and hidden glances. After the win, Tasha's behavior grew distant. Late-night phone calls and secret meetings became the norm. I tried to ignore the red flags, believing that success would only bring us closer. Instead, it drove us apart. The prenup we signed before marriage had been a silent agreement, one I had trusted would protect us both if things went awry. It clearly stated that any money earned during our marriage was ours to share. And it also said that if one of us cheated, the other would claim everything. I believed that was our safety net, a promise of fairness. One evening, while I was working late at the small law firm I'd set up, I received a call from my assistant. "Sir, Tasha filed for divorce," she said, her voice trembling with shock. My heart sank. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. I barely managed to ask, why? All I got in response was a terse statement, "She's leaving with someone else." The news hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind flashed back to all the times I suspected something was off. In the quiet of my office, I started piecing things together. There was an undercurrent of tension in our home that I had ignored for too long. The prenup was now my only hope, a document that could turn the tide if I could prove her infidelity. I thought about the details, the timeline, the suspicious texts, the hushed phone calls. Everything pointed to betrayal. I left my office that night with a heavy heart, determined to gather every shred of evidence. I promised myself that I would not let Tasha walk away with my future. The battle had begun, and each step forward was a step into a dangerous unknown. As I walked into the cool night, my thoughts churned with a mix of grief, anger, and a fierce resolve to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Just as I reached home, I found an envelope on my doorstep, a single piece of paper that read, "We know your secret." I couldn't sleep that night. The envelope had rattled me to my core. I sat at my kitchen table in the early hours of the morning, the cold light of dawn mixing with the lingering shadows of doubt. I replayed every moment with Tasha over and over, trying to pinpoint where things had gone so terribly wrong. Determined to find answers, I began collecting evidence. I started with phone records, email logs, and bank statements. Every little detail mattered. My hands trembled as I pored over the numbers and messages. I recalled the many times Tasha would leave the house without a word and the secretive whispers on her phone. The suspicion had always nagged at me, but now it was undeniable. Later that day, I met with my friend Marcus, a sharp-minded investigator with a reputation for uncovering the truth. I need every scrap of information you can get on Tasha's activities, I told him. Marcus nodded, his eyes serious. I'll start with her phone records and social media. Trust me, we'll find something. His words gave me a small glimmer of hope. While Marcus worked on gathering data, I visited our family lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, to review the prenup. The document was my anchor, a lifeline that could turn this betrayal into a victory. Mr. Jenkins reassured me that the prenup was clear. Any earnings during our marriage were split equally, unless one cheated. This could be your weapon, son, he said firmly. That afternoon, I sat in my study, sorting through old photographs and letters. I remembered the promises we made on our wedding day, the vows that now seemed like a cruel joke. The pain was overwhelming, but I had to keep my head clear. I had to prove that Tasha had cheated, to use the prenup as my shield. Just as I began to feel a sense of purpose, my phone buzzed with a new message from Marcus. You need to see this. Meet me at the diner on 5th. My heart pounded as I read the message. What new piece of the puzzle would he reveal? I grabbed my coat and rushed out, knowing that every moment brought me closer to a confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. At the diner, Marcus stared at me with wide eyes and said, "You won't believe what I found on her phone." At the old diner on 5th Street, the air smelled of strong coffee and faded memories. I sat across from Marcus, whose face was drawn and tense. What did you find? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. There are messages between Tasha and a man named Darren. The texts are clear, intimate, secret meetings, even photos. They're more than just flirtations. This is proof, man. I felt my heart sink further. Darren, her new lover. Every word Marcus spoke confirmed the betrayal I'd suspected for so long. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through the screenshots Marcus had sent me. Each message was a dagger to my heart, plans to meet at odd hours, affectionate words, and promises of a future together. I tried to process it all. I had always known something was off, but this was real. It was all laid bare in digital form. Marcus's voice broke through my spiraling thoughts. But that's not all. I found something else. He slid a second envelope across the table. This came from an unknown sender. It's a recording of a conversation between Tasha and someone else. Listen. I hesitated, then pressed play on my phone. The recording captured Tasha laughing, her voice light and carefree, talking about how the prenup was just a formality, something she could destroy if needed. I froze. My mind raced with disbelief. Could it be true? In that diner, with a mug of coffee growing cold in front of me, the weight of betrayal pressed down hard. I was holding all the pieces of evidence I needed to fight back. The prenup was my trump card, and now I had proof of her infidelity. I thanked Marcus, feeling a mix of anger and sorrow. I knew I had to prepare for the legal battle ahead. Walking back to my car under the gray sky, I replayed the recording again in my mind. It was a promise of ruin, a sign that Tasha had planned this betrayal all along. I vowed to use every legal tool at my disposal to reclaim my life and dignity. As I reached my driveway, I noticed an unexpected package on my doorstep, a thick envelope addressed to me in Tasha's handwriting. With trembling hands, I picked it up, wondering what new twist awaited me. I sat at my kitchen table, the mysterious envelope in front of me. The handwriting was unmistakable, Tasha's. My pulse raced as I slowly opened it. Inside, I found a single piece of paper with a shocking message. I know we had a prenup. You thought I forgot, didn't you? I destroyed the only copy. My world tilted. All my plans, all my hopes, were crashing down in an instant. For weeks, I had clung to the prenup as my shield. It was supposed to guarantee that if she cheated, I would get everything we had earned during our marriage. Now, Tasha had taken the final, devastating step. The document that could have saved me was gone. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. She had planned this down to the last detail. I sank into my chair, feeling both anger and despair. How could she be so ruthless? I thought of all the late nights I spent gathering evidence, the painful phone calls, the silent tears. Everything seemed pointless now. I had been preparing for a victory that suddenly vanished into thin air. In a daze, I reached for my phone and dialed my mother's number. She hadn't been close to Tasha, she always disapproved of her daughter-in-law, but I needed someone to share this pain with. When my mother answered, her voice was unexpectedly light, almost mocking. "Hello," she said. "Mom, you won't believe what Tasha did," I began, my voice breaking. I poured out the entire story, the lottery win, the divorce filing, the evidence of her cheating, and now this message about the prenup. There was a pause on the line, and then my mother burst into laughter, a harsh, cold laugh that cut deeper than any insult. "I'm sorry, son, I'm not laughing at you," she managed between giggles. "I'm laughing at her." I was stunned. "What do you mean?" I asked, heart pounding in disbelief. "My dear, when Tasha insisted on a prenup at your wedding, I had our lawyer get me a notarized copy. The one you had wasn't the only copy. Guess what? I still have mine." Her words hit me like a freight train. The twist was complete. Tasha's plan to erase her obligation had backfired. Tears mixed with a bitter smile as I listened to her. "Don't say a word, son," she said firmly. "We will wipe that smile off her face in court, and then we'll go celebrate." For the first time in a long time, hope flickered in my chest. There was still a chance to fight back, to get everything that was mine. As I hung up the phone, I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. With trembling hands, I moved to answer it, wondering who could possibly be there at this critical moment. I opened the door slowly, my heart pounding. Standing on the porch was a man I didn't recognize, a suited stranger with an air of quiet authority. "Are you Marcus's associate?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The man shook his head. "No, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Jenkins, your lawyer." Confused and cautious, I stepped aside and let him in. He carried a slim envelope that looked official. "This came for you today," he said, placing it on the small coffee table in my living room. The envelope bore the seal of our law firm and a return address I recognized. With shaky hands, I opened it. Inside was a detailed report and another recording. This new evidence, compiled by Mr. Jenkins himself, was a surprise document that not only confirmed the existence of my notarized prenup copy with my mother, but also suggested that Tasha's actions were part of a larger, well-planned scheme. I scanned the report quickly. It detailed how Tasha had coordinated with an unknown party to destroy the original prenup, planning to leverage my trust against me. The plan was meticulous, designed to catch me off guard at the very moment I thought I had control. The recording, however, was even more damning. It captured a conversation in which Tasha discussed her plans with someone who sounded like a legal advisor. They spoke in low tones, carefully plotting how to manipulate the situation so that I would be left with nothing. I felt anger boiling inside me, mixed with a fresh surge of determination. I clutched the envelope tightly. This was more than just a personal betrayal, it was a full-scale attack on everything I had built. I realized that if I didn't act fast, Tasha's carefully crafted plan might indeed leave me destitute and broken. I called Mr. Jenkins on the spot. "I got the package," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. He assured me that every piece of evidence would be used to build a strong case. "We have the prenup copy, son. We're in this together," he said, his tone reassuring. As I hung up, I looked out the window. The sky was darkening, and thunder rumbled in the distance. It felt symbolic. My personal storm was just beginning, and the battle for justice was about to intensify. Suddenly, my phone rang again. This time, the caller was unknown. I answered cautiously. "Who is this?" I demanded, and a chilling voice whispered, "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." The unknown called left me frozen. I sat in silence for several long minutes, my mind racing with possibilities. Threats were not new in this tangled mess, but this one felt personal and dangerous. I looked around my living room, feeling vulnerable in my own home. Who would send such a message? And why target me now, when I was finally gathering the evidence to fight back? I dialed Marcus immediately. "Marcus, I just got a call." "Someone threatened me if I kept digging," I said, my voice wavering with a mix of fear and anger. Marcus's tone was firm and reassuring. "You're on the right track, but we have to be careful now. Tasha's not the only one involved. There are people who stand to lose a lot if your case goes public." I took a deep breath and tried to steady myself. The legal battle was no longer just about money, it was about power, pride, and survival. Every step forward now came with risk. I decided to secure my home, installing extra locks and cameras, determined to protect myself and the evidence I had gathered. My determination grew as I recalled my mother's words. With her support and the prenup safely in our hands, I would make Tasha pay for every deceitful move. That evening, I met with Mr. Jenkins at our office. We pored over the evidence, discussing every detail. "The plan is to use this evidence to show clear fraud and breach of trust," he explained. "Tasha planned everything meticulously. But we have the prenup and her conversations. It's all going to work in our favor." His calm, deliberate manner helped soothe some of my anxieties, but the threat on the phone still loomed over me. After the meeting, I drove home under the dim glow of streetlights. My thoughts were a jumble of anger, fear, and resolve. I replayed the threat in my mind, and each time I felt my determination strengthen. I wasn't going to let anyone silence me, especially not Tasha or her conspirators. Once home, I sat in my study and opened my laptop to review all the files and recordings. The rain began to fall, each drop echoing the intensity of my emotions. I knew I had to document every moment, every threat, so that if things went wrong, I'd have a record of it all. Just as I was about to save the latest file, my computer screen went black. A message blinked on the screen, "We warned you." I stared in disbelief, feeling the weight of the warning settle over me as I realized the stakes had just been raised even higher. In the days following the threat, I became increasingly paranoid. Every creak of the house, every unexpected noise, sent my heart racing. I couldn't trust anyone, especially those who might be working for Tasha. Yet, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed allies who shared my resolve for justice. I reached out to my old friend, Darnell, a trusted community advocate with deep roots in our neighborhood. Over coffee at a quiet local cafe, I laid everything out for him. "Tasha's not just cheating on me, she's planning something much bigger," I confided. Darnell's eyes narrowed with concern as he listened intently. "We've seen this before. When greed takes over, people will go to any lengths to protect their interests. I'll do whatever I can to help." Darnell introduced me to a small group of community activists who had experience dealing with corruption and betrayal. They reassured me that I wasn't alone in this fight. "We'll help you document everything," one of them said. "We have people on the ground, and we can trace every call, every movement." Their words brought a small measure of relief, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. At the same time, Mr. Jenkins continued to work on my legal case, meticulously preparing a strategy that would use every piece of evidence against Tasha. "You have more than enough to win this battle," he assured me. "But we must move quickly before she tightens her grip on the situation." His confidence was contagious, and I began to feel a renewed sense of determination. However, the danger was far from over. I started noticing unfamiliar cars parked outside my home and strange figures lurking in the shadows during my evening walks. Each day brought a new challenge, a minor conflict that made the primary battle even more daunting. Late one night, I sat at my desk reviewing the files when my phone rang. It was an unknown number again. This time, I answered with a steady voice, "Who is this?" The reply was a brief, menacing silence followed by a single word, "Stop." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the phone in the dim light of my study. As I gathered my thoughts, a knock echoed through my door. I hesitated, then slowly approached the door, not knowing if the person on the other side was a friend or a foe. I opened the door to find a young woman standing there, her eyes full of fear and determination. Are you Michael?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, puzzled. "My name is Tia. I used to work for Tasha," she whispered, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if expecting someone to come through the door at any moment. Tia's presence was unexpected but promising. "I know things you need to hear," she said urgently. She explained that Tasha wasn't acting on her own. There was a network of people working behind the scenes to manipulate the situation. Tia had been part of that team, but something had changed. I saw the cruelty in her eyes. "I can't be part of that anymore," she admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. Her confession was raw and honest. Tia detailed how Tasha had orchestrated the destruction of the Prenup's original copy, believing it would ensure her freedom. She also mentioned that Tasha's new lover, Darren, was not just a reckless fling but a key player in her grand plan. The shock of her words left me reeling. Every detail confirmed my worst fears, but also opened a door to potential redemption. I listened intently, my mind racing. Tia handed me a small flash drive. "This contains more evidence, emails, recordings, even meeting logs. You need to use it to expose the truth," she urged. My heart pounded as I accepted the drive, the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I now had a stronger case, a bigger arsenal to fight back against Tasha and her conspirators. Before I could ask more questions, Tia's eyes darted to the window. "They're coming," she whispered, urgency in her tone. I quickly ushered her inside, shutting the door behind us. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I asked, "Who's coming?" Tia hesitated, then replied, "People who won't let the truth come out. You must be ready." The gravity of the situation was clear. The battle was no longer confined to legal papers and courtrooms, it had spilled into our lives. I realized that every step forward now carried a higher risk. But with Tia's evidence and my mother's copy of the prenup, I had something to fight for. As the sound of footsteps grew louder outside the door, I turned to Tia and said, "We need to hide this drive somewhere safe." The footsteps stopped abruptly, and the door handle began to jiggle. I held my breath, not knowing if we would make it through this night. The knock on the door came again, louder and more insistent this time. My heart pounded as I signaled Tia to hide the flash drive in a secret compartment behind some old books. I peered through the peephole and saw two figures, silhouetted in the dim streetlight. They didn't look friendly. I backed away from the door and reached for my cell phone. "Marcus, I need you here, now," I whispered urgently. The fear in my voice was palpable as I realized that the threat was closer than ever. I could hear muffled voices outside, discussing something in a language I couldn't quite catch. In the living room, I hurriedly gathered all the evidence I had accumulated, emails, recordings, messages, and stashed them in a locked drawer. I could almost feel Tasha's icy calculation in every detail of her plan, and I knew that if this was left unchecked, everything I had fought for would be lost. Moments later, Marcus burst through the door. "Michael, we don't have much time," he said, his eyes scanning the room with a mix of urgency and caution. "I got a tip that more of Tasha's people are on the way." I nodded, my mind racing through our options. We needed to secure the evidence, get out of the house if necessary, and alert the authorities. Marcus instructed me to call Mr. Jenkins immediately. "We have to file for a protective order," he urged. I dialed our lawyer's number, explaining the situation in halting, breathless sentences. Mr. Jenkins promised to send a team to secure the premises and review the evidence. His calm voice was a small comfort amid the rising tension. Outside, the footsteps grew louder. I could hear a door creak as someone tried to force entry. I huddled in the hallway with Marcus, every second stretching into an eternity. Tia, still hiding, texted me updates from her safe spot. "They're breaking in," her message read. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house. My heart sank as I realized the full magnitude of the attack. This wasn't just a simple warning, it was a full-blown siege. I clutched my phone tightly, knowing that every moment could be our last chance to escape unscathed. As the intruders advanced down the hall, Marcus whispered, "Michael, hide." Just then, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, its light flickering in the oppressive black, as the sounds of chaos grew ever closer. After what felt like an eternity in darkness, the sound of sirens finally pierced the night. The police arrived in full force just as the intruders retreated, their aggressive advance halted by flashing lights and commanding voices. Marcus quickly led me out of the house through a side exit we discovered earlier, and soon we found ourselves in the safety of a patrol car. The chaos of the siege, the shattering glass, pounding footsteps, and desperate whispers, was now behind us. My heart pounded with a mix of relief and determination as I clutched the evidence that had been painstakingly gathered over these turbulent days. Within days, the trial was set, and the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. I took the stand, every eye fixed on me as I recounted the long, painful journey of betrayal and survival. The cornerstone of my case was the notarized copy of the prenup, the very document my mother had safeguarded, now poised to dismantle Tasha's entire scheme. Mr. Jenkins, my lawyer, called it to the stand and placed it on the desk before the judge. The paper looked pristine and official, a stark contrast to the messy web of lies Tasha had spun. In that charged moment, the room fell silent. Across the courtroom, Tasha's face shifted from confident defiance to pure shock and fury. Her eyes locked onto the prenup, and the realization of her doomed plan flashed across her expression. It was as if time had frozen for her, a moment of undeniable truth. My mother, sitting in the front row, could no longer contain herself. Rising suddenly, she bellowed, "Gotcha," and her laughter rang out, echoing off the walls. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, yet even he couldn't hide the underlying satisfaction that justice was being served. One by one, the incriminating evidence was reviewed, Tasha's messages, recordings of her plotting, and every detail that exposed her betrayal. With the prenup as the final, irrefutable proof, the scales of justice tipped decisively in my favor. After the ruling, I stepped out of the courthouse into the bright light of a new day. I turned to my mother, her smile infectious despite the tension of the past weeks. "Mama, you are crazy as hell, and I love you for it," I said with a relieved laugh. "Let's go on a cruise. I'm gonna do my best to laugh just as much as I have cried through all of this." In that moment, the nightmare was over, and a new chapter of healing and hope could finally begin.